If I had to pick 10 exercises, only 10 movements to build my quads and my glutes, I would focus on these 10 movements. What's up guys, Jay here, jtmfit.com. So these are my current top 10. Obviously this can change, but right now these are my favorite 10 exercises to target my quads and my glutes. Movements that are simple and effective, that just focus on building muscle. Also movements that are gonna build functional strength, stability, core strength, and also exercises that are going to improve mobility. If you guys wanna train using my methods, try a 7-day free trial on my training app. Just tap the link in the description of this video. Now, these movements are in no particular order. Before you guys finish up the video, drop a comment, let me know which exercise you like the best and or which movement you're gonna start building into your training first. Make sure to like and subscribe, and let's dive right in.
Getting into exercise number 1, we have the kettlebell goblet cossack squat. So it's a great exercise for building the quads and glutes and really working in that frontal plane. So working laterally, working side to side. We're gonna be building some core strength and stability, as well as improving mobility with this movement. So if you're someone who has really tight hips, really tight adductors or inner thighs, definitely start very light with this movement and start with a limited range of motion until you get more comfortable and you get more mobile and you can sink into deeper ranges of motion with the exercise. So you're gonna start off with a really wide stance. Everyone's gonna be a little bit different, so play around with the distance. You're gonna lean off to one side, go into a side lunge, sink as low as you can, ideally just below 90 degrees while keeping your chest tall and really pulling the toes up on the opposite leg, keeping that leg straight to allow you to get into a deeper range of motion. Once you stand tall out of the lunge, go right into your next rep on the other side. Exercise number 2, we have the kettlebell front squat. Great exercise for building the quads and glutes. This exercise puts a little bit more focus on the quads because we're holding weight out in front of our body. It's also gonna put a lot of focus on the core as well, just to hold this weight in position throughout the movement pattern. So you're gonna start off by cleaning these kettlebells into the front rack position with good technique. Knuckles are gonna be pointed towards the ceiling. Elbows are gonna stay nice and tight to the body throughout. You're gonna push your butt back, then slowly descend into the bottom of the squat with control, keeping your chest tall, driving your knees outward, and keeping your heels down. You lower just past 90 degrees. You'll then drive up out of the bottom, really pressing through the floor through your midfoot and heel to stand tall. Exercise number 3, we have the Bulgarian split squat, one of the best unilateral exercises for building the quads and the glutes. My glutes get sore as hell from Bulgarian split squats. Maybe the most painful lower body exercise on the planet. Let me know in the comments if you guys agree. So very important with this movement that you have the right distance. Foot needs to be flat on the bench. We don't want to use something that's too high. We don't want to use something that's too low. You don't want your foot too far out where the stretch in your hip is limiting you from getting full range of motion, and you don't want your front foot too close to the bench either. Play around with your distance using your body weight to find a good distance for you. Now, when lowering down into the split squat, I like to lean forward just a little bit. I don't stay too straight up and down, just a slight forward lean, just to get a little bit more of a stretch in the glute. I find that I do get a little bit more of a stretch when I do lean forward slightly. So play around with that as well. See if you feel anything different from a forward lean as opposed to keeping your chest completely upright. And lastly, make sure you're always driving your knee outwards. Never let your knee cave in. Actively think about driving your knee outwards when you lower and when you stand tall, and make sure you guys are lowering with control. Unless you're specifically trying to improve power and explosiveness with this exercise, lower slowly and with control to create a ton of time under tension and to preserve your joints with the exercise. Exercise 4, we have the glute band barbell back squat. So great exercise to really put more work and emphasis on the glutes. The barbell back squat in itself is a great exercise for the glutes, but adding in the band just makes those glutes work even harder. So the band, the resistance of the band with a wide stance is going to want to pull the knees inward into internal rotation. So we need to actively be pressing our knees outward into the resistance of the band, which fires up the glutes. The glutes are an external hip rotator. So start off by pushing your butt back, lowering down into the squat, chest up, driving the knees outward strongly and actively into that band, keeping the heels down, then drive up to stand tall. Your glutes are never going to be able to rest having the band on. So again, it just puts way more work and emphasis on the glutes. You guys can see I'm not squatting below 90 degrees. This movement in particular bothers my torn labrum in my hip, so I squat just about 90 degrees, sometimes a little bit higher, and I still get a lot out of this exercise. Exercise number 5, we have back lunges. So I use kettlebells a lot. Obviously, you can use dumbbells, you can use barbells as well. It's one of my favorite unilateral exercises for targeting the quads and the glutes. Now, getting set up, chest nice and tall throughout. We're gonna take a big step back. There's gonna be a little bit of a forward lean. Again, it's gonna be similar to the Bulgarian split squat. I just find it gives a little more stretch to the glute. So a little bit of a forward lean, big step back, slowly lower the back knee until it lightly touches the floor. Do not slam your knee down. You must control that descent to ensure full range of motion and get the most stretch possible out of the exercise. You'll then stand tall, driving up through that front foot, through the midfoot and through the heel to stand tall, and then switch legs. Exercise number 6, we have walking lunges. So not very different from the back lunge in terms of muscles being worked. Still working the quads and glutes, just another variation to throw into the mix. I really like the walking lunge. They've always felt great on my knees. I've never had any hip pain with these. So I just really like the walking lunge. It's important that we take a big step forward, slight lean, core is braced, let the back knee lightly touch the floor to ensure full range of motion. Make sure you're controlling that. Do not just slam your knee down. And then you're gonna drive up through the midfoot / heel of that front leg, driving up forward, going right into your next step. So there's more balance and stability in some ways with this when we're going right into the next step and not pausing in between like we do pause with the back lunge. And lastly, make sure you're driving your knees outward. Never let your knees cave in. Exercise number 7, we have heel elevated squats. This is my go-to for putting more focus on my quads. So elevating the heels allows us to keep our chest up and more of an upright torso throughout the squatting pattern. It allows us to push our knees more forward over our toes, which stretches out the quads more. The more we elevate the heels, the more of a focus we're going to put on the quads. So I'm using a 2-inch heel elevation. I sometimes go up to 3 inches depending on how I feel. It's also a great variation for me because it doesn't bother my hip a ton. So generally I will stay at 90 degrees, but sometimes when I'm feeling good, I will go below 90 degrees. Just depends how I feel. It just changes that hip angle as opposed to a flat-footed squat. So focus on keeping that chest as upright as possible throughout. Push those knees forward, get a good stretch in the quads. Ideally, you're sinking below 90 degrees, and then you're driving up and flexing and squeezing your quads at the top. If you're somebody that does have knee issues, I would start with very light weight, and I would start with a limited range of motion and see how your knees feel. Ideally, these will help build stronger knees. So start slow and work your way into it. Exercise number 8, we have the single arm front rack side lunge. So very similar to our goblet cossack squat. We're working quads and glutes and core in that frontal plane, so working side to side. If you're someone who is lacking hip mobility, you have very tight adductors and inner thighs, again, start off with very light weight, start off with limited range of motion before trying full range of motion with this exercise. So we're gonna clean the kettlebell up into the front rack, elbow stays nice and tight to the body. We're gonna take a big step out to the side. You're gonna lower down into the side lunge, you're gonna pull the toe of the opposite leg up towards the ceiling, you're gonna keep that leg straight throughout. You're gonna lower down, ideally just past 90 degrees, keeping your chest as tall as possible, driving your knee outward. You'll then aggressively or somewhat explosively drive back up off that leg, back to the starting position, and then go into your next rep. Exercise number 9, we have the single arm front rack step up. So this is kind of in between a regular step up and a lateral step up. So a little bit of frontal plane in here as well. Great exercise, highly functional, quads, glutes, and core. Now make sure you're using an elevated surface that is nice and stable. So a bench is okay. This one's a little bit unstable, so it kind of adds a little bit of instability, which I guess in some ways can be a good thing, but I like to have something a little bit more secure so that I'm able just to focus purely on isolating the muscles at hand. So you want to utilize the foot that's on the floor as little as possible. So you want to try not to jump off the floor with that foot. You want to try and isolate the leg that's up on the surface as much as possible and just really make that leg do 90-95% of the work. Also, strong front rack position, really keep the elbow nice and tight to the body and keep the core braced throughout. And exercise number 10, last but certainly not least, this is an amazing variation in the pendulum lunge. We're using both the back lunge and the front lunge. One of the things that makes this exercise so challenging is going from that back lunge into the front lunge and then from the front lunge back into that back lunge. So not only are we working quads and glutes with this movement, but there's also going to be a level of instability that's going to make this really, really challenging, especially as we get more and more fatigued and the quads get more and more pumped. So all of our lunge principles apply, our technique principles. Back knee is going to lower till it lightly touches the floor, slight lean forward, driving the knees outward. Really explosively drive off that foot going into the front lunge, and then even more so from the front lunge going into the back lunge. So it's going to take some time. If you need to modify this, pause in between your back lunge and front lunge, and pause in between your front lunge and your back lunge until you get really comfortable and really fluid with the exercise.